Greetings all. Welcome to America 250's community conversation with members of the Latino, Hispanic, and Chicano communities. With these conversations, we're engaging with communities across the United States and around the world. Panelists and participants have the opportunity to share what the U.S. semi-quincentennial means to them and their communities and their hopes for the America 250 commemoration and celebration. I'm Megan Springate. I'm the Director of Engagement here at America 250, and I am one of your co-moderators today. Our other moderator is Dr. Carlene Carey, America 250's Director of Public Outreach and Inclusion. A little bit of housekeeping before we get going. Oh, by the way, I'm very happy to see everyone saying where they're from and hello from in the chat. So welcome y'all. I see folks, international folks here, which is exciting, and folks from around the country. Thank you. So again, a little bit of housekeeping. The conversation is being recorded and will be available on the America 250 website and YouTube soon after we're done, rather. Please use the Q&A function or the chat window to ask questions or make comments to the panel. And a reminder to all that America 250 and these conversations are nonpartisan, so we will be keeping that in mind as we have our conversation. And a shout out to Stephanie, Mari, Kara, and everyone else here at America 250 for keeping everything running smoothly behind the scenes. And a special thank you to our ASL interpreters for joining us. There's also a closed caption function. If you would like to turn it on, you can do so from the little bar at the bottom of your screen. Before we meet our panelists, I'd like to give a brief overview of what America 250 is to help set the stage for our conversation. But first, let me introduce Semi-Quincentennial Commissioner and 43rd Treasurer of the United States, the Honorable Rosie Rios. Welcome, Rosie.
Thank you, Dr. Springate. Hola y bienvenidos. I'm Rosie Rios, 43rd Treasurer of the United States, and I'm currently a Commissioner for the U.S. Semi-Quincentennial Commission and also an Executive Committee member. The Latino, Hispanic, and Chicano communities have deeply influenced American history. Today, we'll have an open conversation exploring the experience of these communities in the United States, discuss their rich culture and heritage, and have engaging conversations that will guide America 250's mission of being the most inclusive commemoration in our nation's history. Community conversations will be hosted regularly through 2026, giving people across the country the opportunity to influence America's 250th commemoration and celebration, and perhaps even before 250 years. I'm in California, which used to be Mexico. America 250 aims to tap into the hopes, dreams, and ideas of all communities in order to honor past 250 years and shape our next 250. I am honored to welcome our panelists and all of you attending our community conversations with the Latino, Hispanic, and Chicano communities. Thank you for your support and for engaging with America 250. Now I'll turn the conversation over to our Director of Engagement, Dr. Megan Springate.
Thank you, Rosie. As always, it's wonderful to have you join us. So again, a brief overview of America 250. This is just a very quick snapshot of what our purpose, mission, vision, and values are. I especially would like to draw your attention to our purpose, to catalyze a more perfect union, our values: service, diversity, collaboration, respect, integrity, optimism, and imagination, and also to our themes: invite, involve, imagine, and inspire. And everything we do is shaped around the mission and purpose, these values, and our vision and themes. And you will see all of those be brought to life as we continue between now and 2026, July 4, 2026. The 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So I'd like now to invite the panelists to introduce themselves and share a little bit about the work that they do. Maria Carla, would you like to begin?
Certainly. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a privilege to be joined by my fellow panelists today and join the foundation on this important work leading up to the celebration. I am the founding executive director of Casa Cuba, preeminent center under development for the study of Cuban affairs and the preservation and celebration of Cuban heritage at Florida International University, FIU, in Miami, Florida. We are a top Hispanic serving institutions among the top largest universities in the country, serving as an anchor institution in South Florida. And a big part of the story of FIU is the story of the Latino community, of the Cuban community. So we are really excited about the effort to build Casa Cuba and have a center where we can explore the incredible contributions of the Cuban community and other Latino communities and immigrant communities to South Florida and beyond.
Great, thank you. Marianne?
Oh, good afternoon or good morning, wherever you're calling or zooming in from. Buenas tardes. Thank you again for the opportunity here. I'm with the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute, and our vision statement is advancing the Hispanic community's diversity of thought. And that kind of wraps up about the idea that not all of us think the same. We're not all from the same countries of origin. Many of us were also born here in the United States with family abroad. And at the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute, there are three kind of main points to a lot of what we do. One is really hone in and celebrate the diversity of thought. Second is we have a flagship internship program where we provide opportunities for college students to learn about the public, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector. And then the last piece, I think, is really the element that we incorporate, acknowledging the fact that we come from different places, including the Western Hemisphere. So we have a lot of programming around that as well to educate even some of our own Latino, Hispanic, Latinx members here in the United States. Again, honor to be here.
Great, thank you so much. Omar, would like to say a few words.
Certainly. Hola y saludos. My name is Omari Martinez. I'm the Assistant Division Chief for Historic Resources at an organization called the Maryland National Capital Parks and Planning Commission. Part of my portfolio is to help manage an aggregate of historic house museums, archaeological parks, an aviation museum, and a mobile museum as we continue to strive for inclusive interpretation and community engagement. We have definitely focused and leaned in on Latino community engagement, where this past fall, we even started our very first Latinas in Aviation Festival at our College Park Aviation Museum. So I've been able to do this work around Latinidad in different organizations like this one, the National Park Service and the Smithsonian, and I'm honored to be here with you all and my fellow panelists. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Patricia?
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. Thank you for the invitation to join you all. I am a proud Latina, proud Mexican American, first generation college student, first generation professional, and the proud daughter of immigrants. My background evolved from co-founding a nonprofit to corporate marketing, an energy company, higher education, and back to nonprofit at ACE. And most recently also a co-founder for a startup fintech. I proudly serve as president and CEO for the Hispanic Alliance for Career Enhancement. We are a national nonprofit based in Chicago, and our mission since 1982 is to positively impact workplaces by cultivating the pipeline of Latinx talent, providing Latinos the insight, access, and development to be successful in their careers. And we carry out this mission. The way that we carry out, as you can imagine, has evolved over time, but we carry out this mission through three core pillars. One is through talent acquisition, so programs, services, events, where we're actively connecting anyone from intern to senior executive level roles to our employer partners across the country. The second area being around pipeline and leadership development. So it starts as young as high school to senior leader programs. These are cohort model trainings that through individual leadership assessments, coaching, culturally relevant content, but most importantly, and what I'm most proud of, is creating a multi-generational support network across the country where we have folks more senior in their careers coming as subject matter experts, as guest speakers, as trainers, to those getting started, and to those in their careers doing the same for our students. And lastly, the third final area is around thought leadership. And so this is our Diversity Officer Roundtable, Executives Leadership Tour, our ERG, BRG symposiums, events and opportunities where we actively bring our alumni and partners together to share best practices and most importantly, connect and network. And it's a pleasure to be here and I'm excited for this conversation.
We're really excited to hear from our esteemed panelists on a variety of topics today. Please feel free to unmute your mic and share your thoughts with the team. Without further ado, let's dig into question number 1. The Pew Research Center data indicates that only 3% of Latinos use the terminology Latinx over Latino. What is your preference in the terminology that is used? Omar, would you mind getting us started?
Sure, absolutely. Been a great debate for a long, long time. For me, I prefer, if I had to choose within those two choices, Latinx, Latino, or in Spanish we say Latine. Usually if I'm referring to myself personally, I would say Latino. If I'm referring to a group or an aggregate of people, I would say Latinx to be more inclusive. But really, in terms of my own personal identification, I usually just say I'm a Black Puerto Rican. That's what I usually just say. I like to be specific. I think within Latinidad, it's really important to honor that specificity, honor that diversity, honor that plurality that we have in this demographic. I think it's a wonderful microcosm of what this country is, to show all the diversity that it has, but also to honor the fact that, you know, we have this confluence of different cultures that are connected to Africa, to indigenous cultures, to Spain, but also to understand that there is sort of an asymmetric imbalance between all of them, right? So we have to honor the fact that not everybody knows about sometimes that we have, you know, Costa Rican Americans or people from Uruguay Americans. We get a lot of attention to Mexican Americans, typically Puerto Rican, Cuban Americans, Salvadoran Americans, but usually not the others. And there's so many people that make up this demographic. So I think it's really important to lean into that fact.
I think you're exactly right, Omar. It looks like we've got the chat kind of is on fire right now with everybody having a great discussion that you kicked us off into. Would anybody else like to share their thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Omar's very, very much on point, very eloquent as well to capture the diversity. And as I mentioned, and in some of your themes, you know, this is an opportunity to invite a lot of people and invite different conversations. And so I love the different points of the themes. And it, again, I think it's one of those things where we need to learn and know who our audience is. And it falls in any area, right? So if I'm talking to, as the president and CEO of Chile, to incoming students or interns, they're probably more Latinx. You know, it's also kind of a generational type of thing in some cases. I'm a lot older than them. So for me, you know, it's probably more Latino. But to Omar's point, I usually refer to myself as an American of Mexican heritage. I was born here. I was born in a farm worker camp in Central California, and my parents are of Mexican heritage. And so, you know, I kind of, that's just who I am. And because we are the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute, and we do follow the census information, just like the information identified from the Pew, that's all the words are, you know, Hispanic. And so again, I think it just really depends on the audience that you're speaking to. I know that's not super helpful for some other people who aren't comfortable with that, right? They want to give us one name, but I think that's the whole point of us, is that we're not one name.
I appreciate your point. And on some level, you have to recognize that there's a privilege in avoiding discomfort and confront the reality that things are a lot more complicated than you've been taught. There are a lot of people with histories and cultures that are really rich and just waiting to be brought into the conversation. Mm-hmm. Would anyone else like to comment on this question?
Nada, I really appreciate Omar's and Marianne's really excellent and inspiring reflections, particularly Marianne's your comment about we're not one name really resonates with me. Being born in Cuba, growing up in Havana, I always identified as Cuban. I am very proud of my Cuban roots and the opportunity to honor my heritage. But coming to the U.S., becoming an American citizen, and being part of a greater Latino or Latinx community also gives me a lot of pride. I think there's so much beauty in having resources and options at our disposal. And personally, I think, it's wonderful that folks can choose how they would like to be identified, whether that's Latino, that's Latinx, that's a country-specific identifier. What matters is that we are using the term that aligns with our personal preference, and that we feel comfortable that we're expressing ourselves individually, to the fullest.
Exactly. And that's what it's about.
Well, just to add to everybody's point, I think we're looking at a community that represents at least 27 countries of origin, and here in the U.S., first, second, third generation. Not all of us speak Spanish, maybe Spanglish, right? And I think that there's so much richness to that. I mentioned earlier, right? I personally identify, I love Latina and Mexican American as my identity, but also as being similar to what Mary Ann mentioned, right? We're the Hispanic Alliance for Career Enhancement, and in our communications, we use the words interchangeably, right? Whether it's through language or through written communications. And at the end of the day, if we're working with individuals or individual groups, is asking them how they would prefer, if it's an event or a special roundtable conversation. It's just, if you're not sure, it's always asking. And the last thing I did want to say is one of my favorite reads last year was the book by Paola Ramos, which is Finding Latinx. And so I love that book because it gives you a different perspective on the term, and also just her conversations with undocumented community, to farm workers, and really looking at it from a different lens.
We always appreciate a good reference here, so thank you very much, Patricia. We've got a question in the chat. It looks like there was a question about the difference between Chicano and Latino/Hispanic. Would anyone like to address that question?
So I'll give that a little bit of I'm not the historian here, but I'll give a little bit of texture on that, coming from California. So there was a time when there was a specific group, mainly in the California, the Southwest states. There was somebody who mentioned earlier, that the Southwest state used to be part of Mexico, and part of Texas también. And so there was this sense of really just kind of feeling not heard and being discriminated against. And this really fell more on a lot of our young, now what I would refer to, young Latinx or Latino or Hispanic, and predominantly men of Mexican heritage, not necessarily born in Mexico, but of Mexican heritage. And like Patricia mentioned earlier, there was also a number of them who maybe weren't fluent in Spanish, because if you think about their parents were saying, look, you kind of have to learn the language, and we don't really know the language that well, so don't speak Spanish as much because you're going to get in trouble, right? So there's this group of young people that were working in the service, armed forces, what have you, and there just was an uprising. And the way that they used one word at the time to kind of share and talk about their shared experiences and their shared struggles and the discriminations was by referring to the word Chicano. And so it's very much about a certain demographic and a certain time and place in our American history of Latinos. I think there's some people who still refer to, I know one of my compadres, he's still like a die-hard Chicano, si se puede, viva la raza, that's his whole thing, right? And that's him. That's part of who he is, and that's part of his culture. And I didn't grow up with it, so I don't have that same connection. But he was part of that movement in Southern California mainly. And so that's, again, that's my little piece to add to that. I'm sure there's probably some, wonderful historian in the chat or somebody else who can add to that or give us a reference. I do usually refer people to the work of Dr. David Hayes Bautista from UCLA, who is the guy that I would go to, and if he was here, I'd ask him.
Excellent. We think that little piece is a big piece. It's more than I knew. So I have to say thank you very much for that, for adding that to our conversation. And I couldn't have asked for a better segue into question number 2. It really centers on the idea of heritage and culture that you referenced for your friend. So the Census Bureau 2020 count indicates that the population of Hispanics and Latinos in the United States has grown to represent almost 20% of the US population. Latinos, Hispanics, and Chicanos have a rich heritage and culture. How have members of your specific community shaped America? Maria Carla, would you like to get us started?
No, thank you for the opportunity. Waking up in Miami, in South Florida, every day, I look around and I see physically the manifestation of all the contributions that our community has brought to the U.S. And I think that I'm privileged to live in such an example of what we can do. If when given the opportunity and having the resources, it's a wonderful showcase of our values, of our pride, of our growth, as a community. And as we are building Casa Cuba, we are being very aware that we must honor the incredible diversity within even just the Cuban community, but certainly within our larger, community. We are not a monolith, and we're always thinking within our team, how can we bring in the different perspectives, the different lived experiences, and different backgrounds as we're shaping this vibrant cultural center that we hope is a testament to really the excellence and contributions of our greater community. And we need that representation everywhere. We need that representation in the media, in our boardrooms, in our elected offices, because there really is no single story that represents our Latino, our Hispanic, our Chicano communities. We can, I think, a big part of the work starts by acknowledging that we have different perspectives. We have different lived experiences that, based on our geography, based on how we identify ourselves, given our religion, for example, given our generation, we will have a different story to tell. And our duty is to be able to hear and use all of our platforms at our disposal to make sure that those stories are not just heard, but that they stay and they inform generations to come. We feel a great sense of urgency as we're building Casa Cuba, because we know that a big part of our Cuban community has a lot of first accounts that we want to preserve. We need to build Casa Cuba and capture all those stories. In our FIU, Beyond Casa Cuba, we're doing a lot of work within the public humanities, and testimonials and record keeping is really an incredible field that's growing, and that we are, I think we're really trying to get it right. And so, it's a daily work for us to make sure that we are capturing the stories, that we are representing them, and that they're being preserved, that they're never lost.
Excellent. I love what you said about there not being a single story and necessarily understanding Latinidad as a variety of perspectives. That's something we're definitely keeping in mind. Patricia, would you like to comment?
Sure. I think of some of the economic contributions. I think of, for example, being that our community represents 1.7 trillion purchasing power, 2.7 trillion power GDP. Meaning, if our U.S. Hispanic, Latinx, Latino cohort was a country, it would be the 7th largest country. And in terms of the purchasing power and the GDP. A good majority of that is being led by Latinas. So the women in these households, near over 80%, that are key decision makers when it comes to economic decisions, healthcare decisions. And so to that end, Latinas are also opening businesses, their own businesses, depending on the source, 6 to 7 times faster than any other demographic group. And so that is powerful. And while that is great, and that's a significant impact that we think about the need, what this country needs, but especially the support that's needed moving forward. Yet, when you look at pay, Latinas on average earn 55 cents dollar to the dollar compared to their white male counterpart. Underpaid, right? When you look at representation, let's say corporate boards, for example, were looked at the last decade at around 4%. And so there's initiatives and there's movement there, such as the Latino Corporate Directors Association that's doing some change there. But that needs to be accelerated. And so I think that there's a lot of positives in terms of the intersectionality that our community represents and how important and pivotal that is for the creating allyship and really moving and progress for this country, but also the economic contributions that we represent. And I think it's imperative that we share and that we have these conversations because while we may be part of the community, sometimes we're not aware of these data and the statistics. And so it's important that we're not only familiarizing ourselves with this information, but also sharing.
Agreed. And I love that word you use, intersectionality. It's a great lens for making sure that we're looking at a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different lived realities. Omar, did you have a comment?
Yes, I definitely do. I like to think about the different contributions, starting with my father. My father was born and raised in Santurce, Puerto Rico. He was recruited to work at NASA to be one of the first cohorts of Puerto Ricans recruited from the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez, to come work at NASA. He had a 40-year career there where he was able to work on multiple projects nationally and internationally. And as a result of his success and some of his colleagues' success, literally NASA had been recruiting there for the last 50 years. And now the bulk of the Puerto Ricans that have worked at NASA over the years have come from that recruitment. And my father was the first. And his story is honored in the National Museum of African American History and Culture. I like to think about people who inspire me, like Arturo Alfonso Schomburg, who has New York Public Library named after him because he gave the inaugural collection to that library, which really underscored the existence of Black culture in a Pan-African way. So looking at Latinidad across different races and phenotypes, understanding that Latinos can present like me or like my colleagues and everything in between. I think about, the great Roberto Clemente, who was the first Latino in the Baseball Hall of Fame and was also the first baseball player to petition the Major League Baseball to honor Dr. King's death, because opening day literally was a few days. Opening day was a few days after he was assassinated, and he rallied the troops and got them to postpone opening day to honor this great man's passing. And so I believe that Puerto Ricans and other Latinos have had a great legacy of advocacy for humanity. And I think those are things that can never be understated in our country today.
Excellent. Thank you, Omar. You have such a bright and vibrant legacy. I'm inspired by the work of your father. One thing that I did want to point out very quickly, it seems Major General Valenzuela has joined us. Major General, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Freddie Valenzuela. Spent 33 years in the United States Army, retired. Have since published several books, opened a foundation to give scholarships to all the soldiers that are buried from the Afghan and Iraq War. I have a lovely wife of 56 years, 2 children, and 4 grandchildren.
Excellent. Thank you. Is there anyone who'd like to comment on question number 2 before we move on to number 3?
I just wanted to very quickly just remind everyone that we have also had many members of our collective communities run for President of the United States, and also are members of Congress, either on the House or the Senate. And there is a growing interest right now with the new Office of Diversity and Inclusion in Congress to get even more Latino, Latinx, Hispanic talent in the halls and the rooms of Congress. Whether we all like politics, one side or the other or not, you might be surprised that the rules affect us in so many ways. And it's important that our faces and our experiences be considered in those discussions. And they will only be considered in those discussions if we're there. So I encourage those of you who have an opportunity to serve in public service. Thank you, General Valenzuela, for your service, to consider that, because whether it's at an early age, in your middle, your career, maybe after you retire, we need your voice, we need your input, we need your experiences.
We certainly do. Jabin Castro has been doing some amazing work on the Hill. If anyone is interested, go ahead and Google him and you'll be able to see some of his accomplishments. Third question. The Latino, Hispanic, and Chicano communities are geographically, culturally, and racially diverse. How can we ensure that all these narratives are told accurately and fully? Marianne, would you like to get us started?
Sure. I think it's one of the very first words that you have under your theme, to invite. I think that the invitation is very important. I have a background in corporate marketing. And I remember sometimes people would say, well, we're going to translate that flyer, or in the community, we're going to translate that flyer and we're going to get that flyer out. Back in the day where we used to print things. Okay. I know some of you don't remember that, but we used to print information and people would say, oh, and just, send the flyers here, put them there, whatever. And I remember that really bothered me, because putting information out is not an invitation. My mother in Brownsville, Texas, grew up with signs that said, no Blacks, no Mexicans, no dogs. Okay, so those are the kinds of signs that she saw. So just putting up flyers and putting up posters, that's not an invitation. And so I really encourage a lot of emphasis on invitation. Yes, there may be people, certain communities that you personally aren't familiar with, but I think this collective group, and that's why I was so excited to be here with America 250, is that it's okay if you don't know the community. This is part of that, to say, we may not know you, but we really genuinely want you to be part of this. And it's a genuine invitation to be part of the conversation. So I think the big thing for me is, it's okay if you don't know the group, go ahead and invite them.
But Dr. Carey, if I might just add, I'm a little bit older than this group. I got to tell you, I'm from a different generation. Pluto or Mars, maybe you'll call it. But let me take you back to how I grew up. First of all, if you go back to the 40s when I came around, and into the 60s, I was already fighting a war. And we had the only way we knew about Chicano was in California. That's kind of what we knew. Some of us weren't even Hispanics. We weren't allowed to speak Spanish to start out with in the state of Texas. But I think the fallacy comes, and I appreciate the comments by Marianne from a congressional perspective. But my 30 years in the Army, the first 10 years, I was an other. The second 10 years, I was Caucasian. And the third 10 years, they forced me to say that I was a Hispanic. Forced. How did they force me? Well, the minute I labeled myself a Hispanic, the next question from the federal government, what kind of Hispanic are you? Are you Puerto Rican, Mexican, Cuban? Are you from Central America, South American? Are you Canary Island? Are you from Portugal? Are you from Brazil? And so consequently, that's a volunteer statement. Many of us, in our modesty and our DNA and culture, from a volunteer perspective, may not want to say where it is we come from. First of all, I'm a half-breed. So I'd be willing to bet you most of us are. So therefore, what nationality do you actually admit to? And I have 29 nephews and nieces, all half-breeds. I think I've mentioned that before. My children and grandchildren fall in those categories. So it's all about identification. But in today, if an immigrant were to identify in any one of those categories from a volunteer perspective, if their parents came in illegally, then they would be putting the onus on the parents. And a lot of people will not admit volunteer-wise. So therefore, we are divided into so many groups. We all don't look the same. We don't cook the same. We don't dance the same. we're different, and you can't just brush us together. It's a pretty tough issue where we find ourselves today. But as you go back to my days, some of these things weren't even around. And to hear a Latinx, I'm clueless. And only 3% of the country understand that piece. Now, it may be an economic issue, maybe whatever, but my identification, going back to one of your questions, is I'm an American of Hispanic heritage. And I think that resolves my whole issue. And they can label me the way they want to, but in our days, and I'm only the 4th American of Hispanic heritage in 240 years to be a general officer. That's impossible to believe. We've only had 19 cents. So the system, we're growing, and it's good to hear that the Congress, but even then we're split, Republicans and Democrats, Hispanics, and that becomes another political issue that I won't discuss. But so we have our own divisions within our heritage, which is kind of interesting. Sorry for the comment.
No, we appreciate the comment. There's no need to apologize because I think all of these are really, really rich contributions to our discussion. So thank you. Maria Carla, did you have a comment?
I think this question builds upon, my previous reflections in response to the second question. But I think if we think about this beyond our community, humanity in general, I think fostering a sense of curiosity, a sense of appreciation for diversity. If those are entrenched values that we can cultivate, starting on our dinner table with our children, with our families, by having conversations that showcase that it's wonderful to learn from the diverse experiences of others, wherever they are, then we can really get closer, right, to being able to tell our story without fear of biases, fear even of attacks, particularly when we're living in times of so much polarization, so much misinformation. There is genuine fear in sharing our stories, in raising our voices. And I think that the first step to make sure that narratives are being told accurately is to be able to share your own narrative, right? That's, I'm a history major. I go back to the source, right? And we want to make sure, I always, come back to the work of building Casa Cuba. It's my day-to-day. It's not a job. It's a mission that we have at FIU that we want to do now. And we take it with incredible responsibility. How can we make sure that everyone is telling stories? And even within the Cuban community, we hear a lot that there is, the Cuban story or the story about the Cuban American community. And some members of the community might feel the expectation within their own families, their own community, or even pressures by the greater society and the media to adhere to one narrative, to one story, when in reality, there are as many stories as members of our community we can share, and more and more. So I think it all boils down to eliminating that fear, fostering appreciation for diversity, fostering curiosity, and making sure that everyone is empowered to be free to tell their own story.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I was just going to add to that, and I appreciate all the comments, especially, what General Valenzuela mentioned regarding the fear aspect, and even, Maria right now talking about that. It starts with you, right? And so I think it's being able to share your own story in terms of how you identify your own story, your own narrative. But I remember earlier on in my career when I was meeting senior leaders and executives and asking them to share their story of Latinidad or their background, there was a lot of hesitation, right? You're looking at, no, I'm not going to go speak in front of my corporation. I'm at the executive level. I don't want to talk about it. And now we're seeing a shift where there's more pride, and then you see the empowerment that happens to their colleagues or employees or those that look up to them. That I remember one energy company that we work with in early around 2015, we asked for their highest ranking Latina, yay high, short stature, blonde hair, blue eyes, comes in for the very first time leading their engineering department. and announced in this program that we had, announced in front of everybody about her Mexican heritage. She announced about how she went around with her mother cleaning houses, right? And how that impacted her. And everyone's jaw dropped. And there, in the audience, because they never thought she was Latina, she was Mexican American. And that ripple effect to the Latinos within this company that said, oh, we have someone like us here, just is super empowering. And so I just say that to say is respecting everyone's journey and where they are in terms of sharing that narrative and comfortability. But it does start with each of us, right? And sharing that. And the second piece I do want to say, I think I saw it in the chat earlier, is supporting the American Latino Museum. I have some friends that, I know that are leading this initiative, and I think that would be a huge win for our community to ensure that our stories, our narratives, our histories is exhibited there.
I wanted to kind of just add a couple of things. First of all, General, you're amazing. You're amazing. That was great. I'm so glad that you made it, and so we could hear your testimony. I just want to also piggyback off what Marianne said earlier in terms of inviting us, because it's not just an invitation, it's a cultivation, right? You want to cultivate these relationships. I think in the past, even in the recent past, we've been invited to the table for an event for a short time. And then once that person has accomplished what they wanted to accomplish, that relationship goes by the wayside. And I hope that through America 250, we learn to do better, that we learn to cultivate relationships, that we're not paternalistic in our approaches, that we really engage with each other in an equitable way to have equitable partnerships. And I was thinking about my experience, because one of the things I did in the past, where I was a park ranger with the National Park Service, and I worked intermittently for the Office of the National Museum of the American Latino Commission, which are the commissioners that wrote the report that led to the museum that Patricia just mentioned. And I could tell you that was really the first time in my life, as someone who's researched and studied and engaged with Latinidad for a long time, that I really fully understood the breadth of diversity of Latinidad in this country. Like, there's so many intersections. There's so many intersections. We can talk about ethnicity if you want. We can talk about race, but we can also talk about whether someone just came to this country last year versus someone who's third or fourth generations of the border crossed over them, and everything in between. And so when we talk about Latino engagement, I just want to throw caution in the wind, in the sense that, just to reiterate what some of my panelists said, we are not a monolith. So this is going to take some time. It should be an iterative journey that you should always go back again and again to see which spaces that you left, because you're going to miss something, because there's too many intersections. But give each other grace about that, right? So that let's not jump on each other too quickly, but let's also continue to inform one another about all those intersections so that we can continue to address them in a responsible way.
Dr. Kerr, can I just throw one last piece in? My daughter right now is the only female Hispanic Republican judge, now a justice of the Fourth Court of Appeal in San Antonio, Texas. The only one. And if I use her as an example, tremendous role model. But I think women of Hispanic heritage, women are going to lead the fight. Nothing against us males, but the women are just more methodical. They're willing to stand up and voice their opinions much better, I believe, than some of us males, maybe because of the environment in which we are working at or whatever. And I challenge my lovely ladies on the panel. I think you are the ones that are going to take us to the next level. Only you, because I think you got a better crack at it. You're threefers in a lot of senses. You're brilliant. You're good looking to boot. You're educated. You have it all. But I think you're going to have to lead us along the way, because I think it's diversity is much more open to the female than it is the male. And I think that going back to what Omar said, if we can endeavor, if we can push this noodle down the road, I believe we'll get there a hell of a lot faster than we would if we do it with us males. Nothing against Omar, you and I, but what can I say?
Thank you, General. And just a question. Next question. So what are the common misconceptions people have about the Latino, Hispanic, and Chicano communities? How can America 250 help address these misconceptions and move the conversation forward with new narratives?
First of all, they think we're all Democrats, one. But two, we're quickly labeled. But if we're soon to be 70 million and we bring over $900 billion to the economy, which is about $180 million a minute, we're a power to be reckoned with, politically, militarily, socially, and economically. We're in the lead run here. We can really pull this off. So I would just say that hell with labels. If we just come together, no greed, no envidia, none of this stuff, just put that aside and we stick together, I think we can pull it off.
Yeah, I
That's
get
from an old guy.
No, I love it. And I also wanted to tell the general that I'm sure, and congrats to your daughter. The reason, I'm sure a big reason that she's also successful is because she has you. And that's what we need more of.
You need to tell her that, but go ahead.
We need more men who are supportive as well. So thank you for that. And I don't know Omar's accomplishments in supporting women, but I have a feeling kudos to you as well, dear.
Absolutely.
I wanted to just emphasize that, we have a lot of museums, as mentioned, a lot of locals, regional museums. And to me, it just seems like the America 250 initiative is really more about a collective of celebrations versus, including all the stuff that wasn't all that fun and all that cool. Like, it's not like we're saying it didn't exist. It's just that we're going to say, we're 250 years old, we're awesome, but then we did this and then we did that and then we did this. Like, I don't know that we need to say that. I think that we need to be like, we're 250 years old and wow, this is what we've done. This is what, our communities have contributed. And it's, the fireworks in the sky, not to dig through and figure out, did they really do it right? Oh, who really helped them? Or was it EEO? Was it affirmative action? Was it blah, blah, blah? I think the focus is just move on, celebrate and move on. And let's use this as a platform and opportunity to spread the word of celebrations and accomplishments that maybe some children and people in different communities haven't had the chance to see in their communities because of whatever else is in their environment. That's my 2 pesos.
I like those 2 pesos. Would anyone else like to comment?
Yeah, I would say, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Omar. No, I did want to add that there was research done last year on from the We Are All Human Foundation that surveyed Latinos. About 2,000 respondents, I believe they had from that, and 77% responded not being familiar with the power behind our Hispanic Latinx community, meaning the purchasing power, economic contributions. And so first, I think the perceptions out there, we have to drive that by our own stories, like we said earlier, but also creating awareness for our own selves in terms of the data and the contributions behind our community. And then the last thing I did want to say is there's also research by the Latino Donor Collaborative that measured perception of Latinos in the US. And so they surveyed non-Latinos, right? And we do see a shift, right? I think one of them being from the community being looked at as from takers to contributors. And the survey done in 2012 was that 70% of the respondents viewed Latinos as takers in terms of taking from the economy, in terms of cost of education and healthcare. Fast forward to 2021, 83 of the respondents view the community as contributors, especially when it comes to the purchasing power. And so I think there's a positive direction, but I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done there. And then the other one being that the perception that the majority of Latinos are undocumented, right? And today we've also seen a shift where not as significant, but where they show that the data appears that perception went from a majority to at least 33% that believe that the community is undocumented. So I think, again, it starts with each of us in terms of just sharing the data and statistics and becoming familiar and ensuring that we're helping change the narrative to a more positive direction, and that it truly is, right, what it truly is.
I just wanted to respond to Marianne's 50th is not a celebration, but really is a commemoration. And the way that I make that distinction as a museum professional and public historian is to understand that commemoration involves some level of interrogation, right? So at some point, there are things that did go wrong. If we harp on them to the point where we bring ourselves down to low, I don't think that's something that we should do. I think it's really just how any good leader or project manager, you do an event, you do a component of your project, and you assess and reassess and do better next time. And I think that this is the exact opportunity we have for this 250th and these years leading up to it. I also wanted to kind of lean on the question that you asked, Dr. Carey, which was really, for me, is that the debunking myth is the monolith. Now, I grew up born in D.C., raised in Silver Spring, Maryland. My four walls of my home was Puerto Rico, right? With Puerto Rico, pure Puerto Rico, right? I step outside of those walls, I'm in Silver Spring, Maryland. I'm right in a major metropolis right next to the nation's capital, which at the time was Chocolate City, right? And so there's a very skewed or monolithic way to view Blackness and Latinidad, right? To the point where I decided, or my parents and I decided, I should say, when I was a junior in high school, to hyphenate my name, right? Because although both my parents were born and raised in Puerto Rico, my father had an English surname and my mother's maiden name was Martinez. So it was a little bit more easier for people to comprehend my Puerto Ricanness with a Spanish surname, right? But my birth certificate just says Eaton, right? And so that in itself is a rebuke and part of my struggle to really deal with this idea of a monolith. We have to continue to interrogate it and bring up more nuance in how we treat each other and how we include each other in these conversations. And also, to riff off what Marianne and the general said, I mean, my daughter, since she was 9 years old, has said that she's going to be the president of the United States. She's 18 right now. She's at Virginia Commonwealth University, and she's a political science major, and she's well on her way. And so I wholeheartedly believe in what you said, General. Let the women lead. Let's get out the way.
Let me throw something in there real quick. I think it's important. You talked about the hyphenation. My daughter is Valenzuela, could be hyphen McCleskey, but she chose because she's in the political world. Hell, if I can't make it to Valenzuela, I'm sure in the hell I'm going to draw more white votes if I'm Valenzuela McCleskey. So to her, she dropped the McCleskey, kept the Valenzuela surname because she felt that she couldn't make it that way. She was going to deceive others, have ill perceptions that she brought that Anglo-sized name attached, and that would be cheating. And so it's a counterbalance there. And she said, I'll stick with female Hispanic and I'll run with it. So nothing against us males again, but that's the world we live in. So I'm sorry, let's throw that in there. Oh, excuse me, one more thing. We talked about what we've done for 250 years. We were one of the first folks on the block. I mean, we were here way ahead of a lot of other folks, maybe not the Native Americans, but we have a hell of a story to tell. One challenge I think that I'm very fearful. I have 4 grandchildren, one young lady, brilliant, as are my 3 grandsons. But the pandemic has set my 3 grandsons back 1 or 2 years. My fear is it didn't hurt my granddaughter at all. So with that being said, because we don't do very well, I guess 45% of us don't get out of high school in one form or fashion. If we're set back a year or 2, that means we have to regain that momentum to get those males back in the fold. And so that's one of my biggest worries as a grandfather, but more so as a community of Hispanics.
It's very hard to follow my peers after so much has been shared, and I'm drawing so much inspiration from all of your journeys and all your reflections. I wanted to just draw very quickly, going back to your question, Carleen, on the issue, the misconception, right, also that exists, that we're single issue voters, that a lot of us, really just care about whether it's immigration or whether it's identity politics, and I think this is a great platform, again, Absolutely. To showcase all of our diversity. Once again, we are not a monolith. We have so many varying interests, opinions, and we cannot, it's not possible to corner us right into one side of the spectrum or the other. And it's so important to showcase our diverse stories. It's so important to have ambassadors that really, I think what's beautiful about having ambassadors, having role models, particularly for communities that are underrepresented, that are misunderstood, but there are so many misconceptions abound, is the power of inspiration. Not just to inform and share truth, but just to inspire so that the next generations, we've talked a lot about the power of women and what we can do. Well, women need to see women having a voice and in positions of power to be able to rise to their full potential. I take a lot of personal inspiration in, when I was in college, I was a Latino recruiter for the admissions office. We had a program for undergraduate minority recruitment, and it was a place that I never thought I would be part of. It was Harvard University. I had just come from Cuba a couple of years before. I was considered low income. I had just come from ESOL. I was learning English. My parents had been working multiple jobs, minimum wage throughout high school, my high school journey. I never thought that I would be able to afford a place like Harvard, much less be accepted. I thought it was reserved for the elite, the geniuses, and the millionaires. And when I saw that someone who looked like me and was from my community had applied and got accepted, I realized, wait a minute, it's not just me, but so many talented young men and women that I know and I don't know could also apply and get in. But I realized that for all of the information that's out there and case studies, there is not enough inspiration. So anything that America 250 can do to make sure that we are inspiring and we're reaching those folks who are hesitating whether to submit an application to college, whether to run for office, whether to share their story. All it might take is that inspiring story, is that role model to make the difference in their lives and the community's life.
Well said.
I want to say thank you for being that inspiring role model to all of those folks, right? And we've got just one more question that really gets at that question, that theme that we've talked about a little bit before about urban identity versus rural. So are there different degrees of cultural identity that happen in rural areas versus those that happen in urban areas? How is identity based on geographic location different? And this is a public question. So feel free to unmute your mic and jump in.
Well, I can tell you, growing up in a farm worker camp, we were always terrified if one of us had an emergency, because it would take forever for the ambulance even to figure out where the hell we lived. So, so we were always like super worried about those kinds of things. I think for me personally, and my husband is completely different. He was born in Cuba, grew up in Miami, and so he doesn't understand the rural part. Sometimes I'm terrified of walking in certain streets, and it's just because the way we grew up. It's just different aspects of it. And to the general's point, one of the other main concerns that we have right now too is not only are we losing some of our great men and their future potential, but we're losing even extra more people who are living right now in rural communities, and we're not able to access their school or jobs or have those kinds of opportunities through the pandemic because they didn't have a Wi-Fi access. I have a friend who lives in a rural part of Mississippi, and he's been applying for jobs, and he literally has to drive 30 minutes to get to a McDonald's to get online and use his laptop to upload his resume to apply for jobs. So, that's a really big part. I don't know how that gets included and how those stories get in there, but it is real. It still exists. It's gotten a little better in some areas, but we have a long way to go.
Agreed.
I grew up in the suburbs, but I've worked and lived in urban spaces like Atlanta and New York. And when I was in New York City, I was a teacher. And I taught in Bushwick, Brooklyn, and I taught in the South Bronx. And the experience the experience in New York itself is a whole nother level, just because there's no place like it, to be honest with you. But it's just, there was always this idea of eternal foreigner, right? Like these people are, no matter if you've been here for 2 or 3 generations in New York City, which is very possible, sometimes 4 or 5, or you just came from another Spanish-speaking country the other day. But it didn't matter. Like, they were all lumped together. And the correct example I give you is in my first teaching position. I taught 6th grade self-contained bilingual in Bushwick, which is traditionally a Puerto Rican neighborhood. It started to gentrify and change a little bit, and there were other Latinos coming in there. There was a large increase of actually Mexican Americans and Colombian Americans living in that area. It's near a subway train, which made it also more attractive to people with more wealth. And I can tell you, I had a classroom that was supposed to be bilingual, which is supposed to have indicated that all those children are not fully efficient or proficient in English, which is really not what bilingual education is, but that's how it was interpreted during the time that I was there. And then I come to find out, and I have students in my class who've been in Brooklyn. If they weren't born here, they've been there since they were 6 months old, right? Like, at this point, like, there should have been no reason why they're not in a full English proficient class. So here I am, first year teacher, definitely with the help of some other people, finding out ways to test them out of this class, which they should have never been in the first place. And then sort of the flip side of that is, I had one student who was from the Dominican Republic, came here when he was 2 years old. He's 12 at the time that I get him in the classroom. He is not literate in English or in Spanish, and they just continue to push them through. And so these are the type of experiences that happen in urban spaces. I can't imagine it just happens in urban spaces, but since we're doing the contrast, I just thought I'd share that.
Let me throw in one from Texas, probably different than all the other places that y'all live in, but San Antonio, Texas is really a blessing for a lot of us younger folks as we were growing up. The reason I mention that is because it's a city of amalgamation of cultures. Not only is it Mexican and Spanish, Native American, but also we had the fortunate migration of the Europeans. So to the north of San Antonio, you have the German, to the south, the Polish and the Czech, and to the west is the French. So that amalgamation of cultures allowed a lot of us to come out of the rural areas to get educated in the urban areas. And now you see this paradigm shift where we're all going back to the rural side to get away from the big city. So I think that that transitional point, again, that paradigm shift, really allowed a lot of us to get a better education, a better job, not necessarily to the Harvard side of the house, but nevertheless, and now we're mostly returning back to the rural areas as well. So now it's incumbent upon us to get the youth in the rural areas and do what Marianne said, and that's to help get them and get them the same opportunity and resources so they can carry on the ball.
Thank you, General. For our final question of the evening, what are your hopes for America's future for 2026 and beyond?
I think that, we're really embracing the intersectionality that our community represents and leveraging that. I really think it's this community, that we, I have a board member who identifies as Afro-Cubana, right? And, she shares with me stories in terms of spaces that she's in where they're like, you're not Latina. And I think for her, it's using that as a learning moment, right? And I think it is, as tough as it may be for us, is how are we really embracing those learning moments that we each come across to be able to ensure that we're creating awareness, not only for ourselves, because we each come with bias, right? We each have biases that we each carry, but that we get to a space that we're able to have courageous conversations to help generate awareness and, most importantly, build more inclusive and equitable spaces for all, so that not just do we have representation of Latinos in leadership roles, but that we have those that are underrepresented in leadership roles.
Excellent point. Would anyone else like to comment?
I think what we're doing now with American 250, God willing, it'll carry on into 2026 and beyond. I think we have to go backwards just as well as going forward, and that is to tell our story. I've written books so that my grandchildren know exactly where it is that I came from, and I think we all have to tell our stories to the future generations. America 250 could be that transitional point to allow that to happen as we go backwards and forward.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to being able to have the collective of different stories. Obviously, this is a one story of many that you are doing around the country, and I'm looking forward to seeing the richness of the diversity among the Latino Hispanic community, among other communities. And I think it's a really good opportunity for the United States as a whole to really, maybe not just talk about diversity and how we're all really looking to speak on it and learn about it, but really to kind of put a little spotlight on it and show other people from around the world. The United States has been and continues to be a beacon for immigrants, despite, all the other things that have happened. We were born and raised from people leaving another country and coming here for other opportunities. We have people nowadays still coming here for other opportunities. Maybe it wasn't exactly the way that they thought. Maybe it hasn't exactly worked out the way that some people would like, but we're all still here. And we can all say we're, American of, or we're American, and we can add the American word wherever we want and however we want. And so I think that's a really important piece that it would be nice, and I'm looking forward to seeing that richness in diversity to be able to share and learn. I'm looking forward to learning about other communities and cultures that I don't really engage with on a regular basis.
Just to echo my peers, I am so hopeful. I know that we can make it happen, that we can really recognize and, as Patricia said, embrace, our diversity, to leverage its strengths so that we can bring more richness, more value to our communities. And something I think of often is that we stop seeing one another as abstract concepts or mere products of the stereotypes or shared stories that might partly define us, but that do not make up the whole of who we are. I am hopeful that so many more will have the opportunity to live with folks, literally live or spend quality time with folks who represent groups that they know very little about. Like when I was in college, I lived 4 years in a college dorm with my 4 roommates were one Black American from Alabama, Portuguese American from Somerville, Massachusetts, Taiwanese raised in California, Hungarian from Budapest, raised from throughout the world, and they had never met a Cuban who had been born in Cuba or raised in Miami. And so when they now think of someone from Miami or a Cuban, they think of me, but they don't. I am a real person, and they are excited about my story. If more of us were able to spend time with real people, if we knew the names and the faces of folks who represent many different communities, I really believe that we would realize that what we have in common is far greater than the differences that might exist or that we perceive that might exist. So that's a big hope that I have, that we'll have names to draw from, that will encourage us to appreciate the incredible diversity that we are really blessed to have in this country.
But before we look at diversity, inclusion, and equity with other races and other ethnicity groups, we really have a tremendous challenge within ourselves to look at our diversity and our inclusion and our equity, because we're so diverse. Unlike any other group, we are the most diverse. If we can pull this together, there's no doubt, again, socially, politically, military, economically, we are a power to be reckoned with. And So just look at the panelists, the other panelists. I mean, you just can't beat this. And so I applaud all of you.
What that young man just said, absolutely. The nuance is important for us to understand that. My goal and my hope is always to, through my work that I do in museums and historical sites, to help people have transformational experiences so they can understand each other in a more nuanced manner. But at the end of the day, what keeps me up, what keeps me excited about this work, what keeps me excited about America 250 and other efforts is the possibility that we will continue to see the humanity in one another. If we do that, we win. It's just that simple.
Very well said, Omar. Dr. Springate, over to you.
Yes, thank you. I'm just going to share the screen again at the end. This has been incredible. General Valenzuela, I can't, we don't cook the same and we don't dance the same, but it has been my honor to be in the presence of this amazing group of panelists. You have set us an incredibly high bar to meet in sharing all these stories and busting some of these stereotypes, and we are going to do our very best to make sure that everybody continues to be invited and included and represented. Thank you all so much. There's a survey link that will be posted in the chat. If anyone, not if anyone, we would really appreciate your feedback about the conversation that we just had. And again, please reach out to us, engage@america250.org. We'd love to continue the conversation. To the panelists, my co-moderators, all the folks working furiously behind the scenes, thank you all so very, very much for your time today, and have an excellent rest of the week.